Well, white does have interesting ideas here. Even the move bishop e3, sacrificing the b2 pawn, shouldn't be written off completely. Then the developing, well, simple developing move like knight c3 or something. And of course you want to play c3, knight to c3, yeah. So far, a simple natural move.
We can compare it to Maxim's game from this year's Sinkfield Cup against Magnus Carlsen, the game that you mentioned.
Yes,
so it was the same line until d4, queen takes d4, f6, and there Maxim played castle kingside.
Yes.
Let's just have a look at the next few moves. d6, c4.
Yeah, precisely, but that's what I was talking about. So queen a4, the seemingly strange-looking move. You move the queen
d6
for a second time in the game. Yeah, but it was meant to prevent d7, d6. d6, c4.
The Marotz's setup.
Magnus went for c5 immediately.
And queen d3, bishop g7, b3, knight h6. That's how the world champion handled this position with the black pieces against Maxim just a few months ago.
Yeah, right. And it was, well, at some point it turned into a really sharp tactical battle, and Magnus was more precise.
Yeah, it was a very interesting game where the h4 also started marching up the board, h4, h5, later by Vashier to try to weaken the black king. But today he came up with the new idea, queen a4. I'm going to check if there are any games for queen a4, or is that his novelty? Because he did say yesterday in his interview that Rajabov had a free day yesterday, while Maxim had to qualify in the tiebreaks against Levon Aronian. So he had to work his way on a day when his opponent Rajabov could have been just in the hotel watching the games and preparing against Maxim and Levon. But Maxim did say that his coach would be already working backstage and he would come up with an idea.
For both players? I mean,
probably
preparing
yes.
for...
Probably yes.
I know, but
well,
for Maxim he has to... Yeah,
Rajabov had
was
to
already
prepare
there.
against Maxim and his coach, they needed to prepare against Rajabov.
Yeah, imagine being his coach. I mean, you prepare against Rajabov, and at the background you're watching the games, and then you see, once again, that's about yesterday's tiebreak. Yeah. You see Levon sacrificing the exchange on f5 and having completely winning position. What do you think? Well, I was working for no reason. I have to shut down this computer. I have to delete the files. And then a brilliant comeback.
Yeah, but luckily they play so often that I'm sure that Maxim would have used this idea in another tournament, if not here. But in the semifinals, it's even more valuable to have an opening idea that can surprise your opponent, because the knockout system is so much more nerve-wracking than a closed tournament or an open tournament. Here, one small mistake and you go home. There's no way to bounce back most of the cases, because these grandmasters are just so strong that they will hold the draw in the next game if needed, if you make a mistake in the classical game.
Right. Well, so far not much I can say about this position. I do see that there will be some difficulties for black to accomplish his development, because, for instance, if black plays d7, d6 immediately, it might be awkward on account of, well, perhaps an immediate c5 is an idea, because capturing with the queen doesn't really work. In this case, bishop e3 attacks the queen. A queen, if I'm not missing something, has the only square to leave, which of course loses after queen c6. So after d6, c5, black will have to take with the pawn, compromising his structure, and as white I'm hoping to win the pawn back on c5 and claim that white's position is better.
According to my database, queen a4 is a novelty. I'm not claiming that my database is the best database in the world, but it doesn't find any games for queen a4, so it could be a surprise for today.
But you know, if you check this d4, cd4, queen d4 position, you'll find out that it's a very limited number of games. It's maybe 10 games in total.
True.
So that's a very, very rare line if we are talking about move 6 position, which nowadays seems to be the main line against second knight c6 in the Sicilian. And then on move 6 you have absolutely fresh position. So as I said, they've only started to play d4 very recently.
Now the current position in this game is that after knight c3, castle kingside, Maxime is thinking, I would assume that he still has this position prepared. Maybe not to every single detail in terms of like move by move, very concrete lines, because this position is more about the strategic ideas than something very direct.
And then once again, the strategic idea, of course, is to limit the activity of the bishop on c8. So now I'm looking at lines like queen a3, a bit weird move, but attacking e7 pawn and supporting potential c4, c5. Since black seemingly cannot play c5 himself, knight d5, and then both pawns are hanging, so it's really awkward for black. Therefore, after queen a3, a move like d6 is needed. And then white has to, well, I believe Maxime just has to know the answer if c5 works or not. Because that's a very typical move, and if, I suppose, he takes with the queen, queen takes, pawn takes, if white is able to win the c5 pawn back, he is usually, has a pleasant position. I won't say that white is better, much better immediately.
Indeed, but it's a positional pawn sacrifice to weaken the pawn chain of black, and then later white can win it back with a move like knight a4, bishop e3, rook c1. You can't really keep those double c pawns alive.
Yeah, right. And it might be something better than this for Maxime. It's just that, he's thinking. I still believe that, as you said, he probably knows what's going on in this position. Yeah.
I think so. I would assume that he's just thinking about what is the most accurate way to continue, but he definitely should know the ideas here that he looked at with his coach after queen a4.
Yeah, because after queen a4, what black has done is a set of very, very logical moves, because you develop the bishop from f8 to g7, you develop the knight to the only available square on h6, you play queen b6 after c4 to stop c5 with black, and then after knight c3 you castle short. If this line was analyzed, then of course that set of moves had been checked by Graf and his coaches. Yes,
that's our assumption that Maxime is still on his preparation. So let's head over to the other match between the two Chinese grandmasters.
And the other match, I'm a bit surprised that it's only move 10 in this game, because it's a very popular line in this tournament. Was played by Anish Giri against Evgeny in Liren a couple of occasions, and Liren has played it himself. Liren, first of all, that's what we've seen on Liren has played this line against Alexander Grishuk, right?
Yes.
c4, e5, and g3 on a second move, avoiding the bishop b4 things, as we pointed out. So c7, c6, knight f3. C6 is the transposition to what we said, a Lapin Sicilian with colors reversed with an extra tempo, but this extra tempo is spent on g2, g3, which is not always to white's benefit. But white tries to prove otherwise. He has a knight f3, knight to d4, d5, and that's the line they are playing nowadays. d2, d3, bishop to c5 to target the knight on d4, after knight b3, a check on b4, bishop d2, trade happens, black has taken on c4, and I believe Anish Giri and Evgeny Nair, they were debating this position in two games. Queen e7, bishop g2, knight f6, knight c3 perhaps, and somewhere around this point black was going e3. Could be castles, rook d1, e3, something like that. Castles, rook d1, and then Nair would play e3, trade everything, and go knight g4. So there were two games like that, one classical game and one game in the tiebreak between those two.
Yes, and it seems that knight c3 in this game, in the game of Liren and Yu Yangyi, is a novelty. That's an information from Fuxia in the chat. Shout out once again to everyone watching on YouTube and Twitch. We do appreciate your comments. Make sure to communicate your thoughts and ideas with us during the broadcast.
All right, and the move that Yu Yangyi has played, f7, f5, seemingly allowing the queen trade. Well, black loses the castle right, but black wouldn't mind it because king then later on goes to c7 or e7. It's an endgame, so you don't care that much of a king's safety necessarily. And black would have a decent space advantage. I'm not even sure if white has an equality in this line. So knight to c3. After quite some time spent, so it's 1 hour 10 for Ding Liren. He was not planning for this position to occur, it seems.
So if he makes a novelty after thinking for quite some time, it also may well be the case that he is unaware of the novelty himself.
Yeah.
And he improvised the move, which looks natural. You develop the knight, you're ready to bring your rook into the game. And you don't mind the capture on d2, you don't mind to trade queens.
Yeah, well, and I'm wondering, it could be that you are actually taking with the king, just to control the e3 square, to be able to play f2, f3 to undermine black's center. Because capturing with the knight would mean that you're postponing f2, f3 once again, right? So black plays a natural move, and f3, e3, well, I mean, I don't know what's going on, yeah, because the knight will have to go back to b3 or what else, b1, not very pleasant. Could be c5 as well, but then you're really not sure if this pawn survives, right? Because c5 and moving the knight to c4 would be nice, but black stops knight c4 at first place, and then is planning for knight a6 or knight d7, so this pawn is kind of overextended. So I suspect king d2 will be played, and then f3 later on. And once again, the king is not in such a danger on d2, because always rook d1, and if needed, king c1, the artificial castle can be played for white.
Yes, this would make a lot of sense for white. So the question is how can black deviate from this if queen takes d2, king takes d2, if something that white would like to see on the board. What else can black do in this position?
Does he have to take? Does he have to trade the queens? That's the biggest question. Maybe he can just play queen e7, then knight f6, and well, play the game. I mean, no problem, it seems. Just keep the queens on the board, or insist on trading the queens on your terms. Because knight f6, it's like the logic would be if white would have taken and go knight c3, the easiest move to play is knight f6. You develop the piece. I mean, you don't really think of it. So you might as well say, okay, knight c3, I don't really see what's wrong with my knight f6. If you want to take now, it will lead to the position that I was already willing to go for.
Yes, that's very logical. And then the next question will be after knight f6, if white forces matters with rook d1, and then what do you do with the queen?
Yeah, it's kind of rook d1, or possibly even castle. No, castle long is too optimistic. Now that I'm thinking, castle long, then black perhaps might change his mind and say, okay, you've castled long, maybe I want to queer the queens on the board, and then it's not clear whose king is going to be weaker. But overall, to be honest, already there on move 10, it seems that black should be able to save all of solve all of his opening problems.
Could be the case. It's an interesting position because seemingly white should be doing very well for the fact that he's ahead in development. You see that the queen, the knights are developed, and all the black pieces are still on the back rank. But what black has is more space and a very good control of the center, so it's going to take quite some time for white to play moves like f3, as you suggested, Evgeny, to do something about this strong center.
And and even then, like after you play f3, you have to convince, or in this case, force black to take, because one of the possible things would be, for black, would be to just hold on to this pawn on e4, go knight f6, say castle or whatever. If the king takes on d8, then you can play rook e8 immediately. So support the pawn on e4, which seriously restricts the activity of the white pieces.
Yeah, this is going to be a very exciting middle game position, and so is the other semi-final match between Maxim Vachier-Lagrave and Timur Rajabov. Rossolimo, where d4, c takes d4, queen takes d4, and then queen a4 seems to be a novelty. So in both games, we do have an opening novelty at an early stage of the game.
Right, and for Vachier against Rajabov, once again, coming back to this, Vachier has started to think himself, already spent about 10 minutes in this game. That perhaps is a crucial position, so he does have some alternatives there. On 1 hour 12, 1 hour 12 for Maxime, I believe he reached this position with nearly 1 hour 30 on his clock, so already quite some time spent.
It sometimes is the case that even though queen a4 was his novelty, he may not have been that sure that they were going to reach this position. So they did look at it with his coach, but he may have spent more time on other variations. He has some ideas here, but nothing concrete.
Yeah, well, it's very often, especially if it's like not the match against the player, well, not the World Championship match, basically, when you have half a year to prepare, or the closed round-robin tournament of 5 players, so you have a month for that and you prepare the opening. And now you're not sure who's your next opponent is going to be in this tournament,
You have just a few hours, an afternoon or evening to prepare.
And therefore, sometimes you would chaotically look at what's the guy's playing, which is not the case with Rajabov, I believe. He does this. He's playing c5 and knight c6. But what I'm trying to say is that if the perimeter is quite broad, right, like your opponent plays a lot of stuff, and then sometimes you would have an idea, say, against the Petrov, you will have a deep analysis against the Caro-Kann, and then you look at the data, and I've forgotten about this thing, what do I do against c5, knight c6? Okay, I'll go there, I know there is this queen a4, which is an interesting move, and maybe I don't have enough time to analyze, but I'll try and I'll see what happens. Yeah, so indeed you might, kind of just have a hint of an idea of what you're supposed to do, but might not have enough time to analyze it in great detail. Yeah,
this may be the case here with Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, who played yesterday the tiebreaks and was somewhat lucky in his match against Levon Aronian. He called it scary moments of the World Cup, that this game was a roller coaster against Levon. He allowed the exchange sacrifice, which he himself considered a very strong exchange sacrifice, and then he thought his position was at some point probably lost.
Yeah, well, it was. Right, and once again, back on this train of like how quirky nowadays the preparation for the games is. That, I don't remember, I think I was talking to one of the coaches of Russian national team. I was like, was it Vladimir Potkin or was it Alexander Motilev? Those guys, they're actually switching between Russian national women's team and men's team. And it was the Olympiad in Tromsø. Which year it was? 2014, I believe.
Yes, 2014.
2014. And Kramnik plays the game, and he was board 1, I believe. Yeah, Kramnik plays the game, and Potkin says, now that's a key moment, because if this, we've prepared blah, blah, blah. If this, we've prepared blah, blah. If opponents plays this move, he'll make a draw. Kramnik will go for a drawish line. Something like that. Because, sometimes it's even like that. And people play brilliant game, and opponent is not aware that should have he gone for another line, there was absolutely nothing and possibly just, simplifications in a draw.
It happens in chess. Opening theory is so well developed that we mentioned, so many opening variations that end in a handshake without any players making a single move. It's just there are those opening lines that are so well analyzed that you don't get a game, you don't get to play.
Right, and once again, there was this description of what's going on in the opening nowadays. Every now and again, you ask your opponent precisely one question. Do you remember this particular line? And if the answer is yes, you kind of test him. Yeah, that's the approach. Like against the Knight of Sicilians, for example, you can go for something very positional where you're unlikely to get the advantage, so you're postponing the fight till the middle game. Or you can go bishop g5, all these sharp lines, well, look up at some particular try that, well, it is pressing your opponent, and if he goes wrong, he loses. But if he remembers everything, that's not much of a game left.
That's true. And it was a similar situation also in the game of Teimur Rajabov himself against Jeffrey Xiong. That was a theoretical Brunfeld where Rajabov went for a sideline, and he had the same approach. It doesn't refute the Brunfeld, no line refutes it, but it was a very good practical decision, and it actually led to an advantage for the Azeri Grandmaster because Jeffrey didn't exactly remember the line.
Yeah, and now seemingly no one remembers the line after move 10, yeah, because it was Vasilegraf to bring a surprise, and now he's thinking right after three moves he played, after he made the novelty, 3 very natural moves, and then now he's the one who is thinking.
But we do have new moves in the other match between the Chinese grandmasters. The line that you showed with trade on d2 and king takes d2.
So indeed, king takes on d2 was played after the queen's trade. So king d2 in order to get f2, f3 as quick as possible. Well, yeah, and perhaps I have to look at kind of few more moves. Oh, well, Maxime has played
also made a move now that he wanted to abandon his board. He's like, no, spotlight, back here.
Yeah, back here. Rook to e1, which doesn't necessarily change much. And you know what? Have you seen it, our analysis board? It was me playing those moves, f3, knight f6.
Yes, you did.
On the board.
Okay, you predicted all of them.
Yeah, but it's not like...
Good day. Good day in the office.
Certainly a good day, but seriously, that was clear. I mean, why Liren has taken on d2 with the king, not with the knight, because he wants to apply the pressure on this center as soon as possible. And now, well, it's an open, now that I'm looking at it, it's an awkward position for black, in fact, because, well, the feeling is like you don't really want to take, because the fact that you played f7, f5 is something that kind of makes your position awkward. With pawn on f7, black would have little to worry about. But with pawn on f5, it's like having some issues perhaps with this bishop's activity, the bishop from c8, with pawn being on f5, so at some point might be a bit weak. It's not that easy to describe why this move is so committing, but indeed black would prefer to have the pawn on f7. Okay, and then if black tries to keep the pawn on e4, say going for the castle here, takes, then the e4 pawn is overextended, might be weak at times. And I don't see how to make it in this particular position, but white might even want to put the king on e3. Yeah, for instance, now after bishop g2, I suspect that rook e8 is a more precise move, because after bishop f5, white already has sort of an interesting option, playing h3, covering the square, and putting the king on e3. So with the board full of pieces, e4 pawn is weak, at the same time it kind of protects white king, the king on e3, but no knight checks and no dark square bishops to threaten this king. And king will be very comfortable on e3 for the reason that white gets a free hand to trade nearly all the pieces.
Yeah.
It's like king on e3, then imagine everything comes off the board, white is just winning because he takes the e4 pawn.
I was going to ask you, because of these king moves, if you are aware of the bonk cloud, Evgeny.
The opening, yeah. I have no idea where the name comes from.
I don't know where the name comes from, but it's very popular on Twitch, thanks to Hikaru Nakamura, who does play it from time to time in his streams. So this king maneuver toward e3 or e2 did remind me of Hikaru's choice for streams. And of course, it's not the same. There are no queens on the board, so it's less dangerous. But it's still quite rare to see a king in the middle of the board when there are still many pieces in this game too. It's no queens, but quite many minor pieces plus the 2 rooks. Yeah,
I agree. But it's like those are important. I believe those are important moments when you can make use of your pieces in kind of unconventional way, so to speak, right? Because yes, indeed, you would have a lot of pieces on the board. You're saying it's still kind of queenless middle game. I have to hide my king somewhere. But if you're able to identify squares like that, and you make sure that nothing's wrong with having the king there. You basically have an extra piece in this fight for the center.
Yeah, and what's key here, if we can just go back to what you showed with bishop f5, h3, that in that position, king e3 will be possible because the c4 pawn covers the d5 square, the h3 pawn covers the g4 square, and there's no dark squared bishop because a dark squared bishop would do harm to that king on e3.
Yeah, right. And I'm still not convinced that this is like a good position for white, but as an idea, yeah, you have to watch out for such spots for your pieces and for the king especially. And then if something like this happens, one more remark. White practically never wants to take on e4, even if it's tactically possible. Because if you end up taking with the king on e4, having all of your army behind, and black still has a couple of rooks in it. So the objective for white here is not to win the e4 pawn, but to block it for now and try to win it later, and meanwhile trying to trade as many pieces as possible. Okay, so f3 played, and black replied with knight b to d7, essentially giving white the possibility to capture on e4. But that'd be a bit different, I believe, because now once again, king e3 at once runs into knight g4 check, and you have to go back. And the preparation move h3, once again, might be a bit too slow because of black starting with knight e5. Knight e5 and then targeting the c4 pawn. So white is just like one tempo short of coordinating the entire army, because I would really love to go knight d4. Black promises me not to take on c4 with a check for whatever reason. Yeah, and then b3, and well, now I'm actually thinking of king e3.
Then you're in time.
Rook b8, king e3, and it still doesn't work, perhaps.
Yeah,
because there is knight g4.
The
That's
problem
dangerous.
is that your opponent will not promise not to take the pawn, so white is one tempo short to get that position.
Yeah, right. And then I'm looking at it, and well, the knight on b3 is not really a piece you should be proud of.
Certainly not.
Yes, I'm kind of looking for the way for Liren to, well, could it be that e4 shouldn't be played at all? So, but then I still don't see how to... Yeah, well, nice. I believe knight d7, knight e5 is a nice find by Yu Yangyi, because it sort of puts additional pressure on Liren's position. So I'll see how it goes.
So, as a summary for what we have seen in the two games in terms of opening, in both games it seems that there was an opening novelty at an early stage. In this game, Liren played knight c3, which, according to you guys, is a novelty. Thank you, Fuxia, for the information. And in the other game, we also are witnessing the similar situation, where in a sideline of the Rossolimo, Maxime went for this queen a4 idea, which seems to have not been tested ever before. Right.
Speaking of Maxime and Maxime's game against Timur Rajabov, we can go back to that one, and it slowed down quite a bit, because, well, remember Maxime spending quite some time here. Well, he's actually not at the board. Look. What happens with Maxime Bashirograph?
That's a very good question. Obviously, the players are allowed to stand up and walk around normally when it's not their turn. So this could be a case where he either started coughing and he really needed to leave, or it's not usual that you stand up when it's your turn. Yeah, well, some people... Alexander Grishuk comes to mind. So players have what is called the rest area, typically with snacks, refreshments, and so on. And I'm not sure how it's done here, because even though I've been to the playing hall, I've never entered the players' rest area. Yeah, here he is coming back, by the way. Yeah, so typically you would have a screen with the boards, with so-called blackboards, the transmission boards, in the playing area. Yeah, and then what Grishuk would be doing during, already a couple of Grand Prix tournaments and so he stays in the player's rest area, looking at the board. He can see when his opponent makes move, and he's still thinking there, just thinking of the position, and he comes back to the board just to make a move. He's back and he's ready to make a move.
Yeah.
I was confused for a moment because I thought that he didn't play a single move and he left. That's very awkward. That's why I was thinking he may have had some health issues for a moment.
So no, he has played rook
but
e1.
he made a move and then he left.
Yeah, to which Rajabov replied knight f7, which is
Yes.
very normal, so to speak.
And then it's normal that Maxime stood up after playing rook e1 and his opponent made a move while
When
Maxime
he was absent,
away.
yeah. But then, how about that? Bishop to e3. Because that's the move I was, looking at even before rook e1. But according to Maxime, something has happened. Because, look, bishop e3 is, of course, a very tempting move. Attack the queen, then play c5. The bishop from c8 has difficulties developing. But there is a little problem. b2 is hanging. b2 is hanging. So now, what's the difference after rook e1 and knight f7, which makes bishop e3 possible? I suspect it must be the position of this rook on e1, so that I play rook b1, I play bishop d4. That's the only square available for the queen as far as I can see, right? And then I wanted to say I'm trapping the queen. Is it right? Well, perhaps it is.
It does look like, yes.
Perhaps it is, yeah. And then it's very important that the rook is on e1 because it covers, it guards e4 pawn and covers the e2 square. So perhaps that's a tactical justification of playing rook e1 first and then playing bishop e3.
So if the b2 pawn is untouchable because the black queen would end up being trapped, then black will need to retreat the queen, and that's way worse, of course, going back to c7.
Say c7, for instance,
probably.
and then c5. And I believe that's an unpleasant position for black, because then in order to free the c8 bishop, you will inevitably, sooner or later, have to play your d-pawn forward, after which white takes and has a target on c6 and then softens the central formation. So honestly, I'm looking at queen b2 and
if there's something here?
just kind of, yeah, and then sack the queen. I mean, can't this be playable? Because as odd as it sounds, white does give quite a lot of material for the queen. So it will be a rook, a bishop, and a pawn for black, for the queen. So material almost sufficient.
Yeah.
But the problem, once again, is black on time to finish the development? Because I would be ready to claim that if black, say, plays d6 and white, again, the c6 pawn is the problem. If, say, black is on time to do something like that, to stabilize the structure, to develop, then I believe black would be doing okay. It's just that the problem with the queen on the board after queen c7, c5, or after sacrificing the queen in this position, d6 is still not comfortable to play.
Yes.
But that's the whole idea about queen a4. That's why he played queen a4 and move 7.
Will we see a queen sacrificed by Rajabov? This is not the main question after bishop e3, queen takes b2 being one of the candidate moves for black that leads to the trapping of the queen, but he can give up the queen for what the Evgeny said, a rook, a bishop, and a pawn. Will that be enough if he cannot comfortably develop? That is the problem in that position.
Yeah, well, I've just spotted the other move, which perhaps is better than queen c7 at the very least. Maybe that's what he has to do. Maybe that's what he has to do, to go queen a6, to allow the queen straight. But the problem of this bishop kind of stays after, not sure if it's c5 or just a move like ad1, because when you trade, still the same idea that d6 is always answered with c5. Yeah, queen a6. Now that I've spotted queen a6, I believe that's the move that has to be played, because queen b2 is too risky. It's sort of a gamble, which one might take under shorter time controls, but perhaps not in this particular position. Because, first time I was introduced to those positional queen sacrifices, and there was some Soviet book on, unusual material equality, something like that. When say you sacrifice, it kind of it's balanced in a way.
True.
Because, yeah,
because
but,
it
I
may
mean,
be
say,
the same value.
sacrificing the exchange for a couple of pawns, yeah, trading the queen for 3 minor pieces or 2 rooks. And there were examples, and I remember a very old Lasker's game where he would go and sacrifice the queen just for a rook and minor piece, but it changes the character of the game, and his opponent was not able to adjust. For that times, it was just absolutely new concept. Right, and then in practically every position in my games, I'm always considering, can I do this? How bad does it look? Because it also has a psychological impact, or, well, and, you know, so your opponent has to, well, the objectives are changing in the position, obviously, when one side has sort of a material advantage or more powerful piece, but black would have more pieces, I mean, by the count, right?
Yeah,
So,
that is true.
And then if you have weaknesses in the position, sometimes rook and bishop or rook and knight would do better than the queen because they can attack the weakness 2 times while the queen can protect it only once.
We shall see whether Radjabov is actually considering queen takes b2 and giving up his queen, or queen a6 or queen c7. Those are the 3 main moves for black here.
Yeah, but perhaps I'm not being objective, because still the problem that black can't play d7, d6 perhaps is a serious factor. Yeah, I don't see how black is supposed to develop. I mean, that's the problem, because material's almost enough. The king safety, which is another very important thing when you're parting with your queen, right? I mean, the king has to be safe.
Yeah.
Otherwise, of course, like, queen will terrorize you with all those, like, check and double attack, you know, attack something. Yeah, but king is ultimately safe, guarded by 2 pieces, so that's not a source of worries. But how do we develop the bishop from c8? That's the problem. That's the problem. So perhaps, perhaps after all, it's not such a brilliant idea.
A question in the Twitch chat by GhostDBC is if we could take a look at rook f(c)(1) instead of bishop d4. If that move also traps the queen.
There,
that's
rook
the question.
b1, this, rook e to c1 perhaps.
Yes, I think he means e to c1 must be the case, because rook b to c1, or rook f(c)(1) doesn't exist. It has to be e. But then the e4 pawn is unprotected.
Queen d3, yeah.
So how do you trap the queen?
D3.
No, it would either be moving the rook from b1 to c1, but then you're also
then
not
you're
trapping
still giving
the queen.
the b2 square. Yes, I'm not claiming that that's... here perhaps there could be... No, but I don't see the alternative.
You can't use the other rook. It has to be rook b to d1. But thank you for the suggestion. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work out, because you need that e1 rook to protect the e4 pawn.
Yeah, so once again, because this thingy with bishop e3, it could have been played a move earlier, it seems. Yeah, bishop e3, queen takes, rook b1, and here you could try as well to play rook fc1, but queen d3, e4 pawn's hanging. Yeah, bishop d4, queen here, once again, e4 pawn is hanging, hence rook e1 was played first.
We're gonna let Mr. Radjabov think, and that gives me a moment to thank our sponsors and the organizers. The general partner of the event is Gazprom Neft Hantos. The official airlines is UTair. The TESS News Agency is our general media partner, and Match TV, our media partner. Thanks to all of you for supporting the event. Without these companies, it would not be possible to host the World Cup here in Khanty-Mansiysk. And we want to thank you tuning in on Twitch and YouTube. Keep the comments coming, because we do monitor the chat, and we care about your opinion, your questions, your thoughts regarding the games or anything related to the World Cup. Today is the semifinals, first classical game. There's a lot on the line, the main thing being the top 2 spots, because the top 2 will qualify to the candidates tournament, and that's what all the elite players want, to challenge Magnus Carlsen and take the throne from the Norwegian.
Yeah, challenge Magnus Carlsen and lose on the tiebreak. I mean, so far it works like that.
Except for the fact that at the Singfield Cup, Ding Liren, after a decade for Magnus without losing a single playoff, Ding Liren managed to beat Magnus in the tiebreaks. So there is a hope for the rest of the chess players in the world.
For the rest of humanity.
that even Magnus has weaknesses, his Achilles heel.
Yeah, that's correct. And speaking of the official airline, because today I was involved in the process of selecting a couple of positions which would be put in the official airlines on-board magazine from this tournament.
Wow.
So people care about chess.
That is
you
so
know.
cool. I would love to read an in-flight magazine that has chess in it, because all I see is what can I buy in the duty-free. That isn't very exciting.
Okay, so still no move from Timur Rajabov. I believe we...
By the way, Evgeny, since
yeah.
you mentioned games, we do have a vote for the best games, right?
Absolutely.
Remind
yeah.
the viewers about that, please.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I didn't check it today because it could be. So, once again, the whole thing, the structure of how it works. So, there will be an award for the best game of the tournament, which is done in complex way. The jury of very reputable chess experts. I'm one
Including
of
yourself.
That's why, you know. No, but seriously, so we pick the shortlists from rounds 1 and 2. That's already over. Alireza Firouzja in his game against Daniil Dubov has won it. Then from rounds 3 and 4, and to my shame, I didn't check it, and it's probably over. Because before round 5, we've announced that the voting is on.
Yes.
And there is a short list, one of them being Videogo against So, I believe. Well, in my opinion, it was kind of the best game, but, you know, crowd might have a different opinion. And then there will be a voting for round 5 to the final. So quarterfinal, semifinal, final, because it's like less people, less games. So it all be the third game picked by the internet voting, and then it comes back to jury. So we'll have game 1 from the first rounds, which is already determined, Firouzja Dubov, then game from rounds 3 and 4, and then the games from quarterfinal, semifinal, final. And then the jury, once again, will pick one of those 3 to declare to the best game of the tournament. The most brilliant
complex
game.
System, but there have been so many great games here in Huntington 6 that it's not easy to choose one. I do see that we have our latest extension at work today, so guys, check out the Chess Game Explorer extension. If you go to the right side of the screen, I believe, here on Twitch, and then you will be able to replay both games at the same time. So those of you who have been requesting,
how cool is that?
Yeah, why can't we show both games? Or if we analyze, why don't you see the current position? There is an extension for that purpose. Please check it out and give us feedback on how it is, because it's very new and we hope that it's going to work out well, because that's what all viewers wanted, that they can see the current games, they can check their own moves.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You can check the previous moves. Yeah, so like sometimes we would talk the position after move 10 and mention there was a novelty played earlier on, and they immediately should be able to see well, when the actual novelty was. Thanks, Anna, for asking me about the best game contest, because I was about to say something stupid about Rajabov's game and you prevented me from doing so. Because in this position I was ready to say, now that we outlined all the possible moves, we will switch to something else. Guess what? Guess what? He played Queen B7, so which is like 4th possible move in this position, the one that we actually didn't look at. And now that I look at it, it does make sense. But I'm trying to see why it is so different after c4, c5. Well, he has his point. You know, look, Queen b7, keeping the c6 pawn protected, wants to play d7, d6. That's the whole discussion. Yeah, like he always wants to play d7, d6. Now c5 would seem to be a very natural move. But guess what? Now it seems he can take the pawn, because at least the same line does not work anymore because of Queen a6 or Queen b5. So in the previous position, the pawn was on c4, so that would be actually a loss of his queen, or queen sacrifice, if you like. Yeah, but after c5, he'd be able to take the pawn. For which, by the way, White might still have a very, very strong compensation, because bishop d4 now threatens rook a to b1, so you'll have to move all the way back to b7 or b8, b7, b8, b8, b7, and white might play e5.
Can you play queen b7 and half, and then decide which square do you prefer?
Yep, that's how a lot of people play in Blitz.
I was going to say, if Blitz it happens, where's the queen on one of those squares, and then you decide which one favors you. Just kidding. No one can do that. No one should do that. But in a friendly Blitz game, it may happen.
Yeah, right. And I can imagine the position like that would actually be promising for white, because yes, indeed, white is a pawn down, but how about this bishop not being developed? You know, and if something like this happens, like they trade all the pieces, then white definitely has, I mean, I'm not sure if he has enough of a compensation, but there is something for sure, and black has to be careful.
And there's a question in the Twitch chat if queen b8 was better than queen b7.
Queen b8 was
I don't know if that's an engine suggestion or human suggestion, or both, hopefully both.
Well, I think that the whole point, once again, as I said, the whole point was that he wants to keep the c6 pawn protected in order to be able to play d7, d6.
Yes, so it doesn't serve for the purpose of pushing the d pawn, but it does look nicer for the c8 bishop. What's great about elite chess and this very high level of playing style is that these players don't care about the aesthetically ugly moves like queen b7 if it serves a purpose.
Yeah,
and that's d6, bishop d7.
Yeah, right. But now that I'm looking at queen b8, it's also quite a sane move for me. Sometimes what they do in such positions, it's a strange thing to say, but not touching the center, what they do is sometimes g5, and even having an idea of playing g4 to get rid of this knight from e3, and especially with queen on b8, because you would play the queen to e5, and then later h5 if the knight is not here.
Yeah, I'm not against this move, and thank you for the suggestion. I just see, Rochti, that it's your own suggestion, it's not an engine move, so I appreciate it even more. If you guys come up with your own ideas, that's great to see that you're thinking about the position and you want to find an alternative to the moves of these top players. Yeah, of course, maybe we can play better than them. Who knows? Not me.
Definitely sometimes. No, Anna, definitely sometimes. You know, and even them, they won't argue with.
I mean, for a few moves, like we can find moves that they may miss. And yesterday it proved that Levon Aronian and Nikita Vityugov, they made huge blunders. So even the best players in the world can collapse in moments. But they are at the top of the chess world because they are normally way stronger than any of us.
And the thing is the consistency, right? Because, well...
Consistency, yes.
Yeah, you can play 39 very good moves, like playing a fantastic game, but then who cares about that if you blunder the rook on move 40, right?
Yeah.
So that's...
Also, it's easier for us, I agree with you guys in the chat, that analyzing and we can take our moves back, but these players have been playing for 2.5 weeks already here in Siberia in a nerve-wracking knockout system. Like this format, the knockout, I believe is the most stressful for a top chess player because there's so much on the line in every single game.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, people's argument was when the system was introduced that it's actually a good thing. You've lost and then you go home, so you don't have to stay. Yeah, but how about those who are winning? So, well, it sounds fine, but I can imagine, like, for, you know, after you are 2 weeks and sometimes 3 weeks in the tournament, at some point you don't have enough mental energy to care.
Yeah.
You just want the whole thing to be finished.
That's true.
So that's a really tough tournament there. Queen a4 to b3 played by Maxime, hinting at trade of queens.
He has always been a walker, but today he especially stands up almost after every single move he plays. This has been a very tiring tournament for the Frenchman, and so it has been for most players. But a difference here, a slight difference, is that Rajabov qualified from the second classical game against Jeffrey Chong, so he had a free day yesterday, while Maxime had to survive a very difficult game against Levon Aronian. But
Yeah.
he's here. He's
Yeah.
here, and 2 years ago it was the opposite. That Levon Aronian in the semifinals beat Maxime, and then Levon went on to win in Tbilisi the World Cup.
Okay, so Queen A4 to B3 is something, in fact, that we were not looking at. I mean, the attempt to swap the queens, and I'm wondering, yeah, perhaps White would be very happy if Black captures. Yeah, typically these kind of queen trades, when you allow your opponent to capture with the rook pawn, so opening the rook, and those double pawns are practically never an issue. Yeah, that's typically something you don't want to do. Yeah, like opening the file so that your A7 pawn is weak. Yeah, but what I'm thinking about, will he take on B3 himself? Sorry, on B7 himself. It's like, say, Black plays a move, more or less any move.
D6.
Yeah, D6, for instance. Will he take? Or he might consider going C5 in this case.
Yes, and that's one of the problems of D6.
Or maybe take on B7 first. Now that I'm thinking, yeah, after C5, it kind of makes a bit more sense for Black to capture on B3 because Bishop E6 at least. And now there is Knight D4 again. Yeah, that's one tricky position there.
It's not easy to develop Black's pieces.
Yeah. So that's once again, and even the game that we've mentioned, a game between Magnus and Maxime versus Magnus in Sinkfield Cup. Even though in that game, once again, a reminder, Maxime played a different move, so Black at least managed to play D6 and C5, and even then, Magnus was struggling for quite some time to position his pieces in such a way that he'd be satisfied. So, it involved, like Rook B8, Rook B7 maneuvers and all the inconvenient moves, but then eventually he proved to be, he has won the game.
It's a very exciting middle game position, and even after the trade of queens, this position is nowhere near the boring equality that some of us may be afraid of seeing in the semifinals when there's so much at stake. No, both games are dynamic positions with imbalanced pawn structure. Also, there could have been imbalanced material if Black had gone for the queen sacrifice. That was perhaps dubious, but that was a possibility as well.
Indeed. All right, shall we take a look at the other semifinal game? Because it is also developing very, very slowly. So here, after 1.25 hours of play, one more time, 4:15.
Yes, an hour and 15 minutes.
So 1 hour and a quarter, and only 13 moves played. And remember, from time to time we would have a game where the game itself starts on move 20. Like in 5 minutes they would reach move 20, the key position that they both analyzed. And now move 13 for Black to play, both spent roughly half an hour. So, and the other game, not much more advanced, it's move 14. So one more move
So
played.
what happened here was, let's just show one more time this queen trade on D2.
So what happened here was that this position was still very well known, whereas Black in some games trying Queen E7, as I said. Some games, I believe, Black would take on D2 immediately. F5, and then Knight to C3, which our chat says was a novelty, right? Knight to C3. Queen takes, king takes, knight f6, f3, knight b to d7, as we said, knight e5 being a good idea. While Liren takes on e4. Yu Yangyi immediately replies with knight e5. So an intermediate move before White gets a chance to coordinate his pieces. So I suspect this is something you don't want to do with White, because it's really awkward. Black takes c4 pawn with a check, and there is no nice square for the king. So therefore, c5 was played. And now Yu Yangyi, well, he was thinking for quite some time and has taken on e4. Keeping an option of knight c4 check if needed. Perhaps you don't want to go king e3 in such situation, because it's to be too dangerous.
Yes, it's not the same case that we described earlier when the c4 square was under the control of white and h3 was also pushed in the moment we analyzed. In those positions, the king would be safe on e3, but here, right now, it doesn't seem to be the best.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not sure what Liren has to play there, because, well, bishop g2 is perhaps what you end up doing, targeting the pawn, but then after knight c4, I don't see a comfortable square. You can't go to c2 because of knight e3. So, and I'm looking at the, and b2 pawn is hanging, let's not forget. So I'm looking at the line king c1, where you are threatening to take this pawn, but maybe black can actually save it by simply going bishop to f5 and then put it on g6 in case of knight d4. And how do you extract this king from c1 now? Because king c2, there is knight e3 always. You have to control e3 square, first of all.
It isn't simple, and if white cannot connect the rooks by playing king to c2, then how do you proceed?
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't allow knight c4 at all, but how to stop it? It's like e3 controls the c4 square, but gives black the possibility to play knight f3 with a check. And in general, the feeling is, with black having the e4 pawn, you're actually much happier having the pawn on e2, not on e3. Just not to, we play e3 and potentially both those squares are very nice outposts for the black pieces.
That's very true, and what an exciting position this and also the other games. So in both games, it could be that even after the trade of queens, the structure is not usual at all. There are brand new ideas for both players. They have to be thinking from as early as move 10 or move 12 in these games, and that's just very refreshing to see that it's not the typical all-time, for instance, Berlin, all-time Ruy Lopez, all-time, how many others shall I name? It's good to see that the players came here to fight and get a playable position, and anything can happen. I don't know who is better here. Maybe I would take black here at some point.
Yeah, right. I'm still looking at, well, you found an idea and you try to make it work in every single position. So that's what I'm doing with my king e3. Yeah, so point being that if black gives a check and naively takes the pawn on b2, I believe white is winning after rook b1, trapping the knight. However, there might be some problems with this line because black has bishop e6. Guess what? He's threatening to castle long. Rook d8 or castle long will be a disaster for white.
Well, threatening basically mate.
No, well, almost a checkmate.
Castle queenside, almost mate. You need to give up a piece not to get mated.
Yeah, and perhaps that's it, because originally I was thinking of knight takes e4, which kind of stops castle long check because of a counter check, even though even this would be more than fine for black. But problem with knight e4, of course, the only problem with knight e4 is that black is winning immediately. So king e3, no. The answer is no, not king e3. And was there any good option for white? Not yet.
We haven't seen one
just
just
bishop
yet.
g2. Okay, so he plays bishop g2.
Developing the bishop, putting pressure on the e4 pawn makes a lot of sense, but Liren doesn't seem to be that satisfied with his position.
Yeah, absolutely, because remember we've mentioned that knight c4 is annoying. You can't play the most natural move, knight c2. And now, since we were looking at this line with long castle, I'm also thinking that it could be that bishop f5 is even a stronger move. Because bishop f5, and not clear what you have to do. Castle long is coming. Well, perhaps in this case, white can take care of like rook on a1, so that after castles he can go to c1 with the king. Yeah, so the problem having the king on c1 is the rook from a1 is not entering the game. So it could be that you have to play a move like this for it, or wherever it goes. I want to play to d1, which is the most logical. But then it's not castle long check, but knight c4 check, and then knight e3. It's actually not a pleasant position for Liren.
No, I really started to like black's position. Earlier on, I was afraid that this e4 pawn will prove to be really vulnerable, but as long as it's on the board, it's a pain for white. You can barely develop your pieces, the king is problematic, and there are all sorts of knight forks and knight jumps that are annoying because of the c4 square, the g4 square, the e3 square's weakness. So it does seem like here it is Yu Yangyi who could have good chances. We of course are not checking the engine, but human intuition, I would say, I would love to play this as black. What about you, Evgeny?
Yeah, it seems that perhaps Liren, so it's not a disaster just yet, but if after 15 moves you have to care to ensure you have it in quality with white, that means something went wrong.
Yes, and knight c3, even though in this game knight c3 on move 10 was an opening novelty by Liren, he made that move after quite some thinking. So we are considering that he made a novelty without knowing that it's a novelty and without knowing much the position that arose from knight c3.
Yeah, right. And still not sure why do they keep playing this line with white, and why on earth black wasn't playing bishop c5 and then, well, basically the line that Yu Yangyi chose, why black wasn't playing it before. Because there have been different tries, and sometimes it would go to a very, very sharp position. There have been very nice wins by white, but this seems to be a very simple recipe to get a very, very solid position for Yu Yangyi. Well, at least it looks like.
Yeah, a
Looks like
question
that now.
from Ghost on the Twitch chat is if rook a f1 after bishop to f5
bishop
could be a
f5.
plan with the rook lift to f4. Thank you for your question, and
yeah.
we do care about your opinion on YouTube and Twitch, so make sure to tell us about your thoughts on the games.
Well, perhaps, again, the problem would be a check from c4, where the king has to move, and then knight getting to e3.
With a tempo, that's
so attacking
problematic.
both the bishop and the rook. Which, once again, might not be a disaster, because indeed rook f4 is possible.
And if knight
He
takes
can't
g2,
take,
rook takes f5.
Yeah, can't take on g2, or wait, is it possible? That actually is a very, very interesting tactical line, because point being, why I'm pausing here, because at first I thought black is winning by force. G5, the bishop is protected, so you go to f2, he goes knight g4, traps the rook. Bad news.
Seems to be end of the
Feels
story.
bad man, yeah. But
Feels bad man, good.
You take on f5,
Look at you.
knight f5, rook f1. Both knights hang. But it goes on and on, because the knight e3 is possible, again attacking my stuff, rook f6, knight takes. Now it's all about will or will not I be able to trap the knight. Yeah? And then, say, white takes on e4, heads towards d6, and even in the position after rook f8, where black is seemingly able to trade the rooks, I'm not 100% convinced, because white can trade, go king d2, the knight is still kind of cornered, rook d8. Seemingly white has this, maybe not, who knows. Knight d6, say b6, e4, bc5, e5. I've destroyed the position completely. I don't know what's going on. But white might have chances even here.
Yes, it's not easy to assess the position where the g2 knight is basically trapped. We can't take it as white, but it also has nowhere to go. And this knight on d6 is very strong, supported by the e5 passed pawn. The other knight is about to jump to c5, take that pawn.
Yeah.
So a massive position.
Well, honestly, I mean, I believe I've made at least 5 mistakes before that, but this position I like for white.
Yeah. It's just to show an example of how things can go really wide here. And the chat is definitely appreciating your Twitch vocabulary, Evgeny.
Well, maybe not all people on chat know, but I used to watch, and still I do watch a lot of Hearthstone, so at least, I mean, the basic things like...
Yeah, shout out to Neil, Neil, if you are still with us. We are talking about Lorenda, of course, who's helping us out here in the chat, and shout out to everyone else who enjoys other games such as Hearthstone. Peter Svidler being one of the biggest fans of the game.
Well, yeah, but you know, there've been a lot of strong Hearthstone players at this tournament, and well, at least I'm aware of 4 of those. And must have been more. So it's Peter Svidler, Evgeny Tomaszewski, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Kirill Alexeyenko.
I didn't know about Alexeyenko and Tomaszewski.
Yeah, Alexeyenko and Tomaszewski being at high legend at times. So it's like top 100. Well, it's a different system, so it's the kind of the rating updates every month, right? But still, I mean, people from time to time would enter the top 100. Not the world top 100, it's divided on regions, so European top 100, for instance. But still
quite an achievement, and I see that many of you enjoy indeed Hearthstone and other games outside chess, which is great to see, of course. This chess community is a colorful community where we do embrace other games as well. And Lorinda is with us. Shout out to Lorinda one more time.
Yep. So, no bishop f5 just yet from Yu Yangyi. Perhaps the alternative being the knight c4 check that I've mentioned here. And there could be other moves, in fact. More or less any move with the c8 bishop makes sense in order to play castle along with the check very next move, right? So maybe bishop g4 you want to try. Could be bishop e6 saying, yeah, perhaps I'll trade the knight at some point. So, of course, black does have alternatives, and he'll keep thinking, while in Vashielgraf's game against Rajabov there are some news. So, let's switch over there.
Let's check in with the latest moves in this game. So, queen trade on b3.
Yes, there's something that I was criticizing and saying typically doesn't. Well, it's not supposed to work, but it was played, and that's, once again, I feel not ashamed about that, because, well, point being that in modern chess, before breaking the rules, I mean, you have to know the rules, but then the exceptions is what, that's the language those players are talking about. They all know this is supposed to be a good position, this is supposed to be a good pawn structure. But then, if someone can find a case that, but here, yeah, you thought that was supposed to be good for you, but now that's an exception, that's acceptable for me, I can play it.
Indeed, that's what makes a grandmaster, and on top of that, these are over the grandmaster level. All these participants are super grandmasters or elite grandmasters.
Well, I don't care if he's an elite grandmaster, but how he's supposed to guard his pawn on a7 after knight d2? That's what I'm asking.
Even top 10 players need to guard their pawns according to Grandmaster Evgeny Miroshnichenko. I agree with you.
That's the favorite thing to do.
I'm a pawn grabber. I love free stuffs. I have an emote for free stuffs.
Okay, so a7, and I believe he will proceed with the special way of defending the a7 pawn, which is not defending. Because, I mean, if you play a6, it's such a, you know, such a sad move to make. I mean,
it is a sad move.
This pawn will not survive for long anyway, and yeah, it's just that it's so slow.
So it's sad because it will not survive for long, and also it restricts the c8 bishop because you push your pawn to a6.
Yeah.
So in the game what happened was...
Not even a knight d2, but rook takes a7 at once. Well... What's that? Rook takes a7. b3 can be taken, no? That's what...
It's a hanging pawn. I love free stuff, so let's go.
Yeah, so
let's go.
You take it. Now, well, I think Maxime has spotted something that instead of, say, protecting it, trying to win, so, well, perhaps my knight d2, well, what I didn't like about this move, that kind of slows white a bit down, and black might consider moves like f5 opening the bishop, or even jumping with the knight to e5 first, heading towards d3, right? So maybe black would get some initiative. Rook a7, I suppose black does play rook b3, what else? And then perhaps Maxime has spotted some way to prevent black from developing the bishop still. Which is not this, knight a4, right? Knight to a4, guard this. Planning for knight d4 or knight d2, depending on the situation. So the rook, of course, will be kicked away from b3, and later on something like knight b6, while the bishop is still on c8. Well, it's awkward to play d7, d6 for black because the pawn on e7 is hanging. But even with all those factors being mentioned, I'm no longer sure if white has an advantage. Because it's such an improvement for black in terms of getting rid of the weakness, right? The pawn on a7 was like the only weakness for black, in fact, because the other pawn structure is compact.
And that is being traded for white's b-pawn.
Yeah, and then in such positions, remember yesterday we were discussing this d4, d5 on a tiebreak played by Yu Yangyi, getting rid of the weak pawn but opening the files for your pieces for your two bishops. So I can imagine here that in a critical moment, black plays d5.
Yeah,
Just
to
blows
free
everything
his
up.
pieces.
Yes, and
Indeed.
then he'll have the compact structure, he'll have the two bishops, the potential of, say, not playing for a win perhaps, but escaping will be great, right? So he has to have to look for a right moment to open the game, and so I believe black has to have good chances for counterplay.
Yeah, and I agree with you guys, those of you who are comparing this kind of position to a Banco gambit. It does have similarities with the A and B files open, the Phi and Cat third bishop. Here the problem piece for black is the C8 bishop, but as Evgeny said, in the right moment, even D5 could be an option, sacrificing a pawn to open up the position and develop very quickly.
Anna, let's go pawn grabbers. Knight d6, another ugly move.
Instead of
double
sacrificing,
attacking.
let's take a pawn.
Yeah.
I actually
Double
would do
attacking.
that, yes.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, how can you defend them?
Yeah, strangely enough, might not be a terrible move, because I've mentioned it just out of just to show how ridiculous move you can consider, but it might be not a terrible move, in fact, because knight d2, we are playing rook to b7. Yeah, the knight on d6 might not be that terrible, strangely enough. I don't see what's so wrong with this. Because in case of a rook's trade, I'm actually playing another ugly move, knight to b7, just to support d6 and c5.
Yeah. And you don't allow knight c5. I mean,
Yeah.
knight c5 is possible, but
Yeah,
it's just a
you
trade.
can play, knight b6 perhaps in this case, just to
More
make
critical,
sure
yes.
black no longer has a pair of bishops. But I believe that would be an acceptable position for black. Just take, okay, white plays b4, restricts here, now my knight is not that impressive, but still black's position looks playable. f5, king to f7, the bishop works. Maybe nothing wrong with this. Let's see. So, well, or rook b7 at once could be the other possible move.
And in the meantime, do we have any new moves in the other game while
No.
Roger was thinking?
Not at all.
No new moves.
Bishop g2, and now it's turn for Yu Yangyi to think. So, well, because I believe our assessment of this position is correct, that black, I don't know if black is better, but black solved all of his opening problems, and now he is the one who has perhaps a couple of very attractive alternatives. So that's certainly the moment when you stop and spend your time. Yu Yangyi is arguably more tired than Liren. I mean, as after yesterday's roller coaster, the tiebreak, and
At the same time, what
at the
happened to
same
him
time.
yesterday that gives him an emotional boost because he was almost out and now he is here.
Yeah.
So he's
Second
playing
bird
like a
for this
free
tournament, yeah.
participation.
yeah, right.
He
It's a
could have
free
gone
roll.
home, yeah.
Free roll. Let's call it a free roll, right?
Yes.
Because you should have been out,
Yes.
and basically you're just given a second chance.
And then you may actually start playing even better because there's no pressure. You may think, oh, yesterday I almost got knocked out. That last Armageddon game was terrible. He got back his chance. He's here. So he's free to do whatever he wants. He got a new chance. That's also liberating. And I agree that he must be tired. But at the same time, that feeling when you survive such a situation.
Yeah, and you know, in a way, once again, I don't know how this game is going to finish. I don't know if he's even like has better position right now. But in a way, he's lucky that he's playing with the black pieces, because having the white pieces after such a tough match, it's very tempting to, you know, to say, I'll try for something very, very solid and make a draw, postpone it to game 2.
Yeah.
But now he had to prepare. Well, within the limited time that was left, they finished the Armageddon game like
very
8
late.
p.m. or something. Yeah, and then you have to calm down. I don't know if he was preparing, in fact. Well, particularly against Ding Liren. Even though, as we figured out, they've played 36 games or something, so they know each other quite well. And we might be missing tons of games they played in the Chinese league. You know, sometimes the Chinese rapids, something which are not going to the database. So it might be many more.
Yes,
so I believe those guys, they know each other quite well.
We have been referring to their head-to-head score. 36 games we found in the database without the Chinese league and other tournaments that, as Evgeny mentioned, may not be included. But 36 games, and it's 6-5 the decisive results. 6 wins for Ding Liren, 5 wins for Yu Yangyi. But that includes also rapid and blitz games. So it's very close to score. And the same goes for Vasyl Agrava and Timur Rajabov. They played 21 times earlier against each other, including rapid and blitz. And there have been 3 wins for Maxim and 2 wins for Rajabov. The interesting fact there is that their last game was back in 2017, May 2017, at the Moscow Grand Prix, which in chess time, that's a very long time.
2 years.
2 years, over 2 years.
Yeah, that's too much. Yeah,
that's their last game.
But as we started to explain, so Rajabov's peak was this London 2003, or rather the season before London 2013. Yeah, what am I saying? 2003, 2013, the candidates. And for Maxim, well, he became one of the best players in the world a little bit later. So perhaps when Rajabov was sort of on a cool down from these candidates, Maxim was, well, as high as world's number 3, I want to say. Yeah, 28 something. Maxim has crossed 28 mark.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did. At the moment, Ding Liren is the world number 3 and Maxim Vasyl Agrava is world number 6 by rating. Many of you have mentioned that if Ding Liren has already qualified to the candidates tournament by rating, what is he playing for? First of all, if he qualifies from here, from the World Cup, then his World Cup qualification will count and someone else will get the rating spot for the candidates. Secondly, mathematically, he could still lose rating and drop from the number 1 spot, even if it's highly unlikely.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, he's lucky then. Okay, not lucky, he knows this, but so that the average rating for the period of 12 months is calculated, because otherwise you can never be sure, right? I mean, you have one bad tournament and immediately some other guy overtakes you by just a couple of rating points. So, being as it is, it's very hard to lose a lot of such lot of ratings, so it would have impact on the average of 12 months. And to remind you guys, ratings in chess update every month now.
That is true.
It used to be very, very rare, like once in half a year.
Every half year, every quarter, and now every month. And another detail that we already discussed, that in order to qualify by rating, Ding Liren still had to participate either in the Grand Prix or here at the World Cup or the Grand Swiss in Isle of Man. So he had to be participating at least in one of those 3 tournaments to be eligible for the qualification to the candidates tournament by rating. It's a complex system, but as he said, if he's here, he wants to win the tournament. Then, he doesn't care about the rating. He wants to win qualify to the finals and win the finals.
Yeah, absolutely. And for him, it seems. His last. I don't know his last candidate's result. It was very solid. It could be like he has scored +1. I want to say, not losing a single game.
Yes, that is true.
I think that's what he did. He has won a game against Mamedyarov at the very, very late stage of the tournament. So he proved that he can be very solid against the very top players. And now this season, like winning a tournament not only beating Magnus Carlsen in the playoff, which is of course an achievement, but simply winning a tournament which has Magnus Carlsen in the field.
Yeah, indeed.
That's, for this year, it would seem impossible if you look, apart from the Sinquefield Cup, if you look at the performance Magnus has shown. It was tremendous, like winning events with 1 round to spare, sometimes almost with 2 rounds to spare. And Dean managed to win a tournament where Magnus was playing. Well,
Evgeny, we have some action. Rook b7 and the trade.
Rook b7, rook takes, bishop takes. Okay. And now it's on Maxime to prove that he can limit the activity of the black pieces. Because, as I said, potentially it's black who has more flexible structure and a pair of bishops. And now, I mean, the move c5 that... Well, he didn't play c5, luckily. The move c5 that I was praising beforehand with queens on the board and trying to limit the bishop's activity. Now it doesn't look so appealing because black would at the very least have bishop a6 and then the bishop would work on this diagonal.
So what Maxime played instead was knight to b6.
Was knight to b6, so planning to bring the second rook over to a7. But yeah, but black. Also he attacks the pawn. Well, that's a sort of missed. But still, d6 seems to be a legit move. d6, and if you go rook a1, c5 just on time, attacking this pawn, and then f5 potentially. Well, I don't think Rajaba's position is any worrisome. We'll see.
He does seem to be out of the woods now. You already showed that the one last danger is this open a file and rook a7, but there is a way to deal with that, it seems.
Yeah, there should be. D6 played? Question mark? I don't see really.
And Rajabov standing up.
D7, D6, and yeah, that's kind of an attempt to show confidence.
Yeah.
Like, I play d6 and I go walking.
Both players actually have been doing that quite a lot in this game. Making a move and standing up is the battle of the 2 chairs.
And, there was an advice given by one of the Soviet, authors of those, books for the kids, that that's especially important to stand up from the game if you see a very strong move for your opponent. Because you'll give it away. I mean, and we've seen such cases. So when both players miss, it's a case of mutual blindness. I miss a move or a possibility for my opponent, and then there is a chance that he misses it. And there was a fantastic game over there in the World Cup, a tiebreak between Sam Shankland and Eltaj Safarli. Fantastic in a way that there was a piece that Safarli could have taken. There was a bishop on d6, seemingly protected by the e5 pawn, but the e5 pawn was pinned. And that bishop remained there for 2-3 moves to be taken. And none of them noticed.
Yeah, well, that's really
so sometimes it happens, But if I'm playing a move and immediately understanding that I made a mistake, it's very often I'll just, give it away.
True. Now, what happened here, apart from the fact that Maxime made the move c5,
c5, yeah.
Many of you have pointed out that he has also been cleaning the board a little bit. He may not be satisfied with the cleaning lady's job. There was something on the d6 square that bothered the Frenchman.
So the d6. Yes, I wish we had, very often, it's not clear what chess arbiter is doing around the board, right? Well, they do have a duty. Well, during the tiebreak we had seen, they're keeping the scores, they're writing down the moves. But I wish we would be having an arbiter like in snooker. So you can ask, clean the white, please. And then,
clean the d6 square,
clean
please.
the d6 square. And the guy in the white gloves comes over. Puts the little thingy just to keep the track of where the pawn was, and then cleans the d6 pawn, returns it back to the board, and by that time, of course, you can ask to stop the clock and clean the pawn. Yeah.
Before we analyze the current position, I know that you guys have been repeating the same question in the chat, so let's address it. Why knight b6 was played and not knight c5?
Over there.
Yeah, thank you guys for the comments.
Attacking
the YouTube and Twitch chat.
Attacking both the bishop and the pawn, but Guys, let's be serious. Bishop has taken on b7 the rook, but it doesn't want to be on b7, right? It would probably, and when black plays d6, perhaps bishop c8, bishop e6 or g4 is what black wants anyway. So knight c5, while being a double attack, would perhaps push black in the right direction. So black first goes to c8, then at least I don't see what will stop black from going d7, d6, returning the knight somewhere and then developing the bishop. So it wasn't necessarily a bad move. It's a move with the tempo after all. You attack the bishop and the pawn.
But d6 will also be a tempo.
Yeah, but then black kind of wins the tempo in return after d7, d6. And yeah, b4 is just a random move, but I don't really see the way to stop d7, d6.
Indeed, that's very true. So the current position is, after knight b6, we have reached this moment where d6, c5 was pushed by Maxime.
Right, and then, yes, he has his point that the bishop on b7 is not ideal, but now, you know, black might get a chance to put the bishop on b5 if needed. But I really want to switch to the other game.
Let's have a look at the other game.
A series of moves was played pretty quickly, and I believe we will look at it and then go for a short break. But before, I'm really curious to see those moves being played. So bishop to f5, as was suggested in the chat, rook a1 to f1.
Good job, chat.
And then a check over here, and knight e3, and rook f4, and g5 apparently wasn't winning because black didn't go for it.
The exchange sacrifice. Let's show it one more time. Let's show it.
Perhaps. So we were looking, well, just got to show that Yu Yangyi has made castle, and I don't know from this what's going to happen. But yeah, the exchange sacrifice we were looking at was that black plays g7, g5, and well, I'm just stopping to understand if I'm not blundering something silly.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. F2,
yeah, rook f2, knight g4, and it seems that the rook is trapped, right? So therefore, after g5, white continue. Rook takes, knight takes, and I suspect this and this. And I'm not entirely sure about knight e4, but yeah, that essentially would be the position white would be going for. Knight e4, trying to trap the knight with king e2 and knight d6. Okay, so black decided that castle's short is the better version.
Instead of going for the rook. So it would have been a very exciting exchange sacrifice. We don't know the engine evaluation there, but for the human intuition, there does seem to be enough compensation for the material there.
Yeah, right. But now that I'm looking at it, the f5 bishop is kind of hanging. So can I do this? Point being, that seems to be a very, very good trade for white. The knight on g2 is getting stuck and might not return to the game. But knight d1 gives black knight d5, the square for the knight. So, well, you know what? I'm guessing the exchange sacrifice was possible and perhaps shouldn't be better for white, but it might as well be that Yu Yangyi simply found a better way to play it.
Also, kingside.
It's so tough to get rid of this knight on e3, and it disrupts white's play completely. And then, of course, the threat of g7, g5 is still there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't react...
It's renewed, actually. It's now a better version.
Yeah, because there won't be rook f5. The knight on f6 is still protected. So, guys, I believe we'll go for a short break. And during this time, I promise I'll at least learn what the proper evaluation of this is.
Wow.
You know, well, there are some online engines. It's not so tough. So I'm curious myself, what's actually the evaluation? Because about the other position, I'm more or less sure it's not so much, if anything, for Maxime Bouchier-Lagrave. It's should be around balance. But this one, even though queens are off, it's a very, very unbalanced position, very tough position to assess.
Very true. So we're going to leave Ding Liren think in our break time about his response to Castle Kingside, and then we are back with the rest of the action here at the semifinals of the 2019 FIDE World Cup. Stay tuned. We'll be back very shortly. Welcome back, everyone. This is the semi-finals of the 2019 FIDE World Cup here in Khanty-Mansiysk, and we have 4 players remaining from the starting 128 participants.
Right, so we have the so-called Chinese semi-final, where both players coming from China, Liren and Yu Yangyi, and a battle between France and Azerbaijan. Right, Maxim Vashelograf against Timur Rajabov. And in this order they play today. So Liren with the white pieces, Maxim Vashelograf with the white pieces.
Let's catch up with the last few moves that happened during the break.
And in both games, in fact, we have queenless middle games, so to speak, right? So queens were traded pretty early in both games. In Liren's game against Yu Yangyi, there was a queen's trade on move 10. Well, a bit later for Vashier and Rajabov, but still very complex positions, and seemingly white doesn't have any kind of an advantage in both games. So remember, before the break I've promised to check what the actual evaluation is over here, and we were talking about 2 possibilities for black, and the move bishop f5, which Yu Yangyi ended up playing, perhaps wasn't the strongest one, because the alternative knight c4, according to a weak engine, so to speak, the engine I was able to check online with, was even stronger, after which black would have considerable advantage.
And how does the line go after knight c4
so
as
knight
an
c4,
example?
king c1 has to be played, and then I believe it was castle short, which is not that easy to comprehend. You leave the pawn on e4 unprotected, but well, that was engine choice. So bishop to f5 is still more than okay, and black's chances are still somewhat better, at least in this moment. So what has happened was rook f4 and castle short, after which Liren has spotted knight d4, which perhaps was one of the few moves that still keep the position balanced. Knight takes g2, rook f5, knight e3. That's what we have right here. So a choice for Liren where to move his rook from f5. And the factors in this position, yes, e4 pawn might be weak at some point, but at the same time the knight on e3 is really nicely placed, and it'll be very hard for white to get rid of this knight.
Indeed, and what's next with the rook? There aren't many squares available.
Yeah, well, the feeling is like you can still play rook f4. There is nothing wrong with that. g5 doesn't really trap the rook, because there is still rook f2. And rook to e5.
Interesting.
Okay. Rook to e5. I was looking at this move and I thought black will have to play rook e8 at some point, even though there is a tactical possibility of going knight g4, because the capture on e4 perhaps is not in white's interest. Knight f2, attacking both rooks, and sometimes this knight might be trapped on h1, but not here, because knight f2
it's guarded by the rook
possible,
on
yeah.
f8, so it's
It's
coming
not
out
possible
from
to stop,
h8, indeed.
So rook e5. Now black will have to care about the defense, about the protection of the e4 pawn. Yeah, and the problem with knight g4 is not that white's going to take, but white's going to play rook e7, getting his rook active to the 7th rank, perhaps threatening knight e6 in some cases. And if the rooks are traded, then white can actually take the pawn with the knight, which, by the way, would still be unclear, because the knight on e3 is still a powerful piece, but white will have threats of his own, like going to d6.
Yes, eliminating the e4 pawn is the first step for white to play for an advantage here.
Yeah, right. That's what Liren's game is all about, I believe, in this case. I'm looking at some like weird attempts, like rook to d8, for instance, seemingly blundering the fork, but then, say, black puts one of the rooks to e8 so that the other rook is not really hanging, and trying to make something out of it. But I believe an immediate rook a8 followed, which is once again a perfectly perfectly playable move. In this case, I suspect white will have to trade the rooks. Rook takes, and the problem for white will be, of course, this knight on e3, which seriously restricts the possibility for this h1 rook to join the action. So this way or another, this way or another, you have to try to get rid of this knight.
So they have traded rooks on e8, as you have mentioned.
So that's the current position, That's the current position, and for white, I'm looking at moves like knight c2, even knight d1. Not that I like them, but those are the moves that white should be looking at, just in order to get rid of this knight on e3, restricting the natural path for the h1 rook. And do you know this meme about the knight being called the lobster?
A lobster, and I don't know that. Tell us about
that's Karpov Kasparov. That's one of the matches, the famous game where Gary in the Sicilian sacrifices the pawn. And, well, it's not the game what is important. But in the game, he wins the very nice game. At some point, his compensation for a sacrificed pawn is a beautifully positioned knight on d3.
Yeah,
which
I do know the
kind
game,
of,
yes.
Yeah, you do know the game.
So the octopus knight, what we normally refer to.
That's the octopus knight. And there was a journalist who wanted to say the octopus, but called the knight a giant lobster on d3. And whenever I see some piece like that, so in this case it's a knight on e3. I don't know what it has to do with the lobster, but yeah.
So a knight outpost on d3 or d6. For white it would be d6, for black it would be d3, or also it could be f3, f6, e3, e6, but most of the times it's on the d3 or d6 square.
Yeah, somewhere in the center and very close to the opponent's camp.
On the 6th or 3rd rank, they are referred to as octopus. But now I'm going to also call it a lobster.
Knight c2, from now on, especially, Knight to c2 indeed was played, so getting rid of the lobster. And black might wanted to support it this way or go into d5, but feeling is that very likely that it peters out slowly.
Speaking of petering out, how's the other game at the moment? Because that was becoming more and more solid with the simplifications.
Yeah, well, it seems now as well. What have we seen? We've seen the trade on b7, and white going knight b6, not knight c5.
Then d7,
d6,
c5.
c5, and I believe that was the moment we left the game. And Rajabov comes up with a very fair point, playing e7, e5, the positional move, trying to restrict the knight on f3. So that would be one of white's ideas. To go to d4, opt for e6. And then after e5, this knight for the time being is fairly restricted. Can't go to d4, can't go to... doesn't have any active moves, let's say. And this, I was looking at a capture on d6, seemingly works for black, because knight takes, bishop c5, the pin, rook d8, and after rook d1, black even has a choice, because knight f7 is not that bad, or even a simple bishop f8. And black seems to be more than okay. Therefore, b4, and perhaps in case of a capture, white would take with the pawn just to maintain it there, restricting the knight from f7, and bishop a6, another motif that we've mentioned, that the bishop on b7 is passive, of course. It is somewhat restricted with the knight on b6, but it has bishop a6, bishop b5 maneuver. Rook to a1, bishop to b5, and knight d2. Those were the moves played in this game.
Now, if we compare the position, especially the situation of the light squared bishop on b7, and in 2 moves it's now on b5, way more active than before, supporting the c6 pawn from an active square, not from behind.
And what might be important as well, it is supported by the c6 pawn, because one of the dangers having bishop on b7 in position like that white will go rook a7 and you will have difficulties moving the bishop, while rook b8 would run into knight d7. And on the b5, it's very solid, and black might start, in fact, thinking of, moves like f6, f5. A move like f6, f5 could be an idea. Or he can say, I don't feel like I have an advantage, and then take on c5, play a move like rook d8, and I don't see why black has to be worse here. So I believe it's like a comfortable situation for Rajabov.
And we are heading toward that position with the rook being on d8.
Rook fd8 was played.
So
Yeah,
instead
right.
of capturing, he places the rook on d8, saying that c takes d6 is something that he would like to see.
Yeah, cd6 doesn't really bother him much, and yeah, perhaps it makes sense because it's not yet an idea, but in some positions he might consider going d6, d5 if white doesn't react properly. So that's one of the cases. Yeah, and a capture here after knight d6 would lead to a strange situation where, remember, the knight on b6 was put in order to limit the bishop on b7, but now it will actually be the knight on b6 which is sort of misplaced, and white will at least have to spend some time getting it out of the woods, or maybe it's just not coming back.
They changed roles, so the knight that was supposed to be restricting black's minor piece, the bishop, is now being restricted by that bishop that it was aiming to restrict.
Precisely. Bishop's always better than knight. That's what they say.
Are they?
Always, always. Yeah.
Are they?
No, but that was, it's so pity I cannot, put a random position on this board, because it was a very nice illustration, the endgame example where white has the bishop on b1 and black has the knight on b4. Neither piece can move because there are some pawns arranged in such a way. And then the bishop on b1 looks terrible, but it's just as good as the knight on b4 because none of them can move, and white wins on the other wing some basically king and pawn endgame.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, so sometimes it's
still an eternal battle whether the knights or the bishops are stronger. Always depends on the current position, of course. But here, the light squared bishop of black has significantly been improved from b7 to b5, and the knight on b6 is looking awkward.
Rook a8. Rook a8, trading the rooks, and perhaps that's about the moment this game, is no longer that interesting, hinting at the fact that it's very likely to be a draw.
This is move 23. The players are not allowed to offer a draw until move 31. So unless they find the repetition, there will still be 7.5 moves being played here.
Yeah, right. And the last hope for black that I'm looking at is to take and play d5. Can this be an idea? But probably not. Probably I'm being over-optimistic because there is knight c7 and white gets himself a pair of very dangerous passed pawns. That's probably not what you do. Otherwise, it would be nice, of course, to get to central. d5, d4 being just one move threat to trap the bishop, win the game.
A strong threat.
Yeah, but takes knight c7 doesn't seem to be in black's favor. Black's pawns will be slower. White will play b4, b5 in the very next move. So I think this way or another you trade the rooks. You are not necessarily taking on a8. You can leave this to white because, I say, if I want to take on c5, that's another case. I can do it, and then doesn't matter what white takes with, knight goes to e6, potentially d4. So no problem for black. But at the same time, white is so solid that I don't think white runs any serious risk of getting a worse position.
41 minutes left for Vasyl Lagrov and only 23 for Rajabov, but the position is becoming less and less dangerous.
Yeah, let's see what Rajabov's reaction is going to be. Because, it's really hard to imagine him getting chances, but now with the rook straight, I believe if there is anything, if there is a side who can play for win, it should be black. But yeah, it's very unlikely. It's so solid.
I think on your views about bishops being better than knights, Neil is saying that you have been talking to Peter Swidler too much.
Yeah, that's right. Peter loves bishops.
I also love bishops, especially if it's a pair of bishops, but it's amazing to have a knight outpost on d5 or d6, so Those are my weak spots if I can get that knight outpost.
No, but really, that's kind of a sort of a landmark in your chess education, understanding, and so on. When you're actually able to identify those positions, when knight is better than the bishop, when bishop is better than the knight, because on the surface, or rather in a vacuum, the bishop doesn't play on the whole chessboard, right? It only covers 32 squares, so one bishop, well, should be always worse than a knight, right? Because the knight can jump, and
Yeah,
all
at the
64
same
squares.
time it's a short-range piece, so it's way slower than a bishop. Now, in this position, it is black who has the pair of bishops, but his g7 bishop is still a rather passive piece.
Yeah, so it's very, very likely its destiny will be to be swapped, like go bishop h6, take on e3 or something like that. So far, Jabov has taken on a8. I suspect you take c5 over there, even though there is nothing wrong with f5 seemingly.
Can we just draw how that knight ended up on a8? Because I think it had a lovely route all the way to the other corner.
That's the knight on b6. So it went from b1 to a4 to
c3,
b6,
a4, b6, a8. And it will need to come back from there. It can't stay there.
And bishop f8, rock solid. No f5. No f5. Just this move.
It's likely to lead to a draw, as Evgeny already pointed out, but this is move 24 only, so a draw offer is not possible. And who knows, maybe one of the players will find some spark in this position, a last trick they can play for. It's not completely draw.
I am. I'm actually thinking, is black so comfortable answering knight c7? Because knight b5 followed by c6 is a very, very serious threat. Could it be that it's kind of not over? Because not that many squares for this bishop. Well, perhaps you put it on d3 and chill, limiting the knight, yeah, because otherwise, like going to a4, allowing knight c4 takes, and then white might as well consider taking with the bishop. So black had a pair of bishops. It was a good thing to have, but if one of them is exchanged, then we might say that the bishop on a4 is not that useful.
And
knight c7's played.
Are powerful, yeah.
Yeah, knight c7's played. So now it might be like this one last critical test for Jabov's concept, for Jabov's position.
Are there any new moves in the other game between the two Chinese grandmasters?
Yeah, but could be the last moves, to be honest. Rook e5, rook e8, that's what we've seen. The rooks were traded. Knight c2, remember we were talking how important it is to get rid of this shrimp, we call it? The octopus? No, okay, the knight on e3. Yeah, well, shrimp, lobster, whatever. What else do we know?
I love how it's getting new names. So we're going to name it the shrimp, the octopus, the lobster,
so knight goes to
the
f5.
deer.
Knight goes to a5, knight a3.
Repeating moves, no.
No, but they're right about it, perhaps, because, well, I don't know. I haven't spent as much time as they are in this position, but what they're doing is logical. Knight c2, and you don't want to simplify the position with black, because then this factor that we outlined, that the e4 pawn is overextended, might prove to be just, well, so this might prove to be just a better position for white. So you want to keep pieces on the board. And then white goes knight a3. Well, similarly, what's the point? The knight at the edge of the board, but knight is heading towards c4 and then his own outpost on d6, if allowed. Therefore,
That's
black
my favorite
plays
outpost.
back.
The lobster shrimp.
Yes, and shrimp goes back, and the octopus go back.
The shrubstopus, the hippopotamus, new suggestions in the chat. This seems to be leading to a handshake, where tomorrow will be a classical game with reversed colors. Well, tomorrow is a game no matter what, but after this draw, tomorrow can be crucial if there's a mistake, of course.
Okay, let me check. So, knight c2, that's 1. And then that's second time. So knight e3 in this position will give Ding Liren a chance to claim a draw, which he seemingly is in the mood to do. So it's the last moment where Yu Yangyi can, if so will be his will, can try to continue playing. Knight e3 played. So now
Ding Liren can claim the threefold repetition if we have counted the moves correctly.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure I'm having the score sheet, or rather the digital score sheet right in front of me. Knight c2 will not be the 3 times the position repeated, but the same move as well. And perhaps if we dig a bit in the chess history, there was a slight change of rules, because before that it used to be, so it has to be the same move.
And now it's 3 times
now
the
it's
same
like
position.
Same position. So you went
also
rook
3 times. Sorry, I interrupted you
Yeah.
there, but I remember in one of my games, I was reminded that it had to be the same position 3 times, and also the same person to make a move. So white or black, it matters whose move it is, even if it's the same position.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be. Well, interestingly enough, there was a debate about the castle right, because they say it has to be the same position in the sense that same possibilities for both sides.
And the handshake after knight c2. Ding Liren didn't claim a draw because Yu Yangyi was also in the mood to repeat. There wasn't any danger for any of them for an alternative move. It's a solid draw between the 2 Chinese players, and tomorrow Yu Yangyi will have the white pieces.
Yeah, right. He has he has all the right to be satisfied holding a draw with black against tournament's top seed, but when he comes back to his hotel room, and we'll find out that, well, instead of bishop f5, he had, in fact, the way which would lead to advantage, he might be a bit disappointed.
Yeah, we can show that moment one more time.
Yeah, so one more time. Knight c4 seemingly would lead to a very, very pleasant position. Knight c4 check, where it's really awkward for white to make his very next move. Like you have to play king c1, and then even bishop f5, the move we were looking at in the studio, seems good enough, but the engine was claiming that black in fact can castle short, and having the king on c1, rook on a1 is not the moment when you want to go for pawn grabbing, even though we love taking pawns, but you know, over here it would be really, really dangerous for white. Okay, so one game is over, and I'm a bit worried about the other one, to be honest.
Worried in a sense that it's going to be over?
Yes, knight c7, d takes c5. Now it's Maxime who is thinking. Basically, it's a choice between the capture on c5 with the bishop or a pawn. In both cases, seemingly nothing wrong with black's position. But perhaps, well, now that I'm looking at it, bishop takes could be somewhat unpleasant for black. Yeah, once again, I want to show this, and then bishop goes, and somehow the knight on f7 is not ideal. White will have, inevitably will have the route to get to a5 with his knight attacking c6. So, might be something. Okay, we'll see. 36 minutes left for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, only 21 for Rajabov, but it's moved 25 and the position is fairly simplified, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue, the time trouble.
Yeah, the time control, just a quick reminder, is 1 hour and 30 minutes for the first 40 moves, and from move 41 an extra half an hour with a half-minute increment from move 1 on. And this is the last game of the day. We only have 2 per day.
Yeah, we only have 2. So, but we have an interesting topic to talk about, I believe. So, with
the octopus
this
lobster?
Yeah, the obstacle. Wow, I love seafood. Yeah, with this very likely to be a draw as well. What do you think of tomorrow's games? I mean, the opening wise, I mean, it's going to be very interesting between Rajabov and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, because from Rajabov's standpoint, he can play both e4 and d4, and he knows what the opening is going to be. D4, the Grunfeld. E4, the Najdorf. Yeah, and Rajapov has people working for him, right? So he has coaches, and he might be advised to go for some particular line. And as far as I remember from recent events, and I've been following quite a lot of recent high-profile events, commentating here and there, and Maxime, well, his Najdorf is okay. I don't remember a single game he lost in a Najdorf for quite serious amount of time.
Yeah.
But in Grunfeld, even though he's an expert there, but he struggles against some particular sidelines, and as we discussed in the Grunfeld, it's a lot of stuff you have to know.
True. Both variations, both the Najdorf and the Grunfeld, are very theoretical, and even though Maxime is one of the biggest experts in both openings, if not the biggest, it's a question whether we can give him the title or not, but he's at least one of the best in those two openings. But even in this case that you are the main expert, as you mentioned, it's oftentimes a test of memory, whether he can recall that exact variation where he's being tested every time he plays the Grunfeld or Najdorf. It's like an exam where you need to know the answer to every single question from the textbook, and the textbook may be 1,600 pages.
Yeah, right. And well, once again, the nature of both openings is such that there is no one principal testing line and all the rest say you can play with intuition. It's which sometimes is the case. Like, for instance, you go for two knights defense, which is knight f6 after bishop c4. Well, I'll ruin their position just to show. Yeah? And then, let's say, for the club level, what you have to do. You have to know exactly what happens after knight g5, because that's the most testing line. That's the line that you can lose if you don't know the opening. And for the other moves, and main other move being d2, d3 nowadays, you have to know what kind of the development scheme you're going for, but not necessarily know like move by move till move 20, right? Well, in neither there are at least 3-4 systems which are very demanding. The bishop g5 line, the sharp line, right? And then this so-called English attack, various setups with bishop e3, f3. You really have to know move by move. And therefore, of course, it's hard for Maxime to remember all the stuff.
Yeah, he will of course try, because that's what he does all the time. He has full confidence in his opening repertoire, and normally it works out very well for him. But as you said, there were a few games in the Grunfeld where he got tricked.
Yeah, right. And for the other game, I don't know really, because seemingly Yu Yangyi always plays e4. Well, at least like
most of the time.
His last matches against Vitigo, it was e4. Before that, I don't quite remember, but yeah, it seems like he's an e4 player. And then it will be e5, and Ding Liren seems super confident in these positions. Yeah, like he plays all the main lines. Not the Petrov. In the Rui Lopez, I mean, here he's going for Marshall. He is knowledgeable in various anti-Marshall lines, as well as in Gioco Piano. So I'm curious what will be the opening choice for Yu Yangyi. On the other hand, Yu Yangyi is a very good rapid and blitz player.
True.
And
but Ding Liren as well. To be fair,
after his last tiebreak against Magnus Carlsen, I have to agree. He's a very good rapid and blitz player as well.
He's the only one to beat Magnus in a tiebreak.
Yeah, right. But what I mean that for Yu Yangyi, it's not like he's scared of going to a tiebreak. Because some people, there are examples in the chess history that I believe people felt like playing all in in the second game, just to avoid, because he would be a clear underdog in the rapid and blitz.
Yeah, there have been cases.
There were such examples, yeah. But not with those two. So it could be just, a solid opening tomorrow, and, well, if it happens, a draw in.
Yeah, let's catch up with the current position. There are a few new moves.
Are there?
Yep.
Then I probably lost connection to the board.
So there was a trade on b5.
So he has taken on b5, cb5, d takes, and knight goes to d8. Knight goes to d8, which is important. You want to block the c pawn. Okay, and what's Maxim's plan, in fact? Because, when black gets the knight on c6, firmly blocks this c5 pawn, can it be that black will be slightly better?
I would
Put the knight on
feel
c6,
comfortable there, yes.
get the king to e6, and I don't quite see what's Maxim's idea is. So it's either I've mistakenly thought that white is super comfortable, like taking with the pawn or the bishop, because it felt like there is no need to capture on b5 just yet. Because this position, I'm really not sure what's going on there.
And those of you asking about the format, today is the first classical game and tomorrow is another classical game. So they are playing mini matches of 2 classical games, one with each color. And if it's a tie after the 2 classical games, that's when it goes down to the tie breaks, where first we start with the 25-minute rapid games, 2 of them. If that's a tie, then 10-minute rapid games. And after that comes the blitz. And if it's a tie, even after the blitz, Armageddon, or as Neil calls it, the 9-minute joy.
Yeah, sudden death. That's what they call it as well. So for some it will be 9-minute joy, and for some it'll be sudden death.
9-minute joy for the viewers, I think that was his phrase. I should quote properly.
Okay, I'll try to re-establish the connection with the games. Not really. It still shows the same position, and we already know that knight b5, cb5, and b takes c5 was played.
I think you will get some help to catch up with the position.
Yeah, knight to d8, and knight b3 played by Maxim Vyshyailograph. So here we can have
a closer look at the camera.
Yeah, right. So knight to c6 seems automatic. You want to stop the knight from getting to a5. Should be an achievement. But then I'm not sure how white is planning to proceed, to be honest.
Yes, he should be careful not to get worse here, as you said.
Yes, because knight gets to c6, then king marches to the e6, d7. Knight goes away, king gets down c6. Yeah, that can actually be...
So the current position, now we have it on our analysis board too, when we switch from Ding Liren Yu Yangyi to the actual
wrong one.
game.
So this is played, and this, and knight d8, and knight b3, and Rudolf is hesitant to play knight c6 for some reason.
What else is he considering? Knight b7 doesn't make sense because it allows c6.
Any chance for knight e6? Or, wait a sec, maybe, since... As I said, my plan was like this: put the knight on c6, block the pawn, get the king there, then move the knight, then try to get the king on c6. But
you may say to bring the king first.
Yeah, now like if the knight is already on d8, it might be that king f7, knight a5, king e6 actually works.
Could be, but he in the end decided that he doesn't really want to allow knight a5.
Yeah, and you know what? For a reason, I believe, because c6 is there, and c7 is a threat, and I believe bishop d6 doesn't stop because of bishop b6, and the real problem with c6, king d6, as white has bishop c5.
Oh, beautiful.
Those things have to be watched out for, because
let's show it on the board.
c7, and that's very often like the pawn promotes. So it's in a way it's a double attack. c8 is the threat, and c takes the knight is the threat.
And you cannot prevent the promotion of the pawn. It's a beautiful tactical motif. It will not happen because Rudolf will play knight to c6.
Solid. Very, very solid. Knight c6, and the king goes to f1, the king goes to f7, king e2. Maxim plays really, really quickly. King to e6. So let's see. Now the critical move. Move 31.
Oh,
that's why it's a critical move. We'll find out.
I was wondering, what do you mean?
We'll find out if Maxim Vyshyailograph has some plan to play for an advantage.
Or offer a
he'll
draw.
offer a draw, because he can.
Finally, he can. So we are
Yeah.
referring to the Sofia rule that is applied at most of the top events, that the players are not allowed to offer a draw until move 31, except for repetition of moves.
Yeah, well, the thing is, however, that I'm no longer sure this draw will be accepted. Because really, I do think that black, not that black is necessarily better, but black is safe and can try to play.
And he has nothing to lose. His position is so secure that
Yeah.
if anyone can play for a win, it's black.
Right, so once again, if white just stands still, like doesn't do anything, another possible plan, bring the bishop here, play knight a5. If the knights are traded, that this is the pawn which is on the square of your bishop, so that's a weak pawn. Black gets the king to c6, wins the c5 pawn. It does imply, though, that white's going to stand still, which he won't.
We shall see whether there will be a draw offer and if Rajabov will continue the game even if there is a draw offer. But if Maxim feels like his position is worse, he may just not even offer a draw. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting, that's an important topic or important point you're making, that it is considered to be impolite if you offer a draw in the position that you feel is worse for you, and especially if it's transparent, if it's visible for you and your opponent both, right? Then it's considered to be impolite. So draw offer usually is reserved for either the position that is like completely safe for both colors, or possibly some unclear position where none of the players are assured of him having better chances. Or it might be the situation when, or used to be the situation with those mechanical clocks, no time increment, right? And then I'm very low on time, but visibly in a much better situation. And then sometimes people would offer a draw, because I don't want to lose. I understand my opponent is on a defensive. He understands that his position is worse. But at the same time, I don't want to lose on time. It's no longer the problem with 30 seconds increment. So if you get an advantageous position, of course, you go on, you play.
Maxim has made a move that is g4, and I was looking at the camera very firmly and trying to see whether his lips were moving. I don't think he said anything.
Yeah, but the way Rajabov was looking at Maxim kind of suggests there might have been something.
You think he
don't
mumbled
really know.
a little I offer a draw there?
Well, okay, we'll see. G4 makes sense, though, so getting some extra space here. But I don't see how white gets there. White never gets there, right? It's just absolutely safe position for black. So it's up to Rajabov. Will he seize?
So it was a draw offer.
It was a draw offer on 31.
Very quiet draw offer, because I was really just trying to see whether his lips were moving, and I couldn't tell whether he was just taking a deep breath or he actually said something, Maxim.
Well, it turns out he said, so that's a draw. So both games drawn, and this is the first game of the Semifinals World Cup, Huntington Seas 2019, that is. We'll be back tomorrow for the reversed colors matches.
Yeah, we are not going away just yet. I think we can show the critical moments in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in both games, in fact. Yeah, so, we've explained what was happening in Liren's Yu Yangyi, so perhaps you missed the chance when he went bishop f5 and not knight c4. Here, I'm not that sure about the critical moments, just few stops. So that's the new take on the Rossalimo line after bishop c6, bc6. The d4 line, and queen a4 and move 7 happens to be a novelty. So very early in this game.
Which was Maxim's preparation, but we also think that even though he came to the board with this opening novelty, it wasn't that much prepared in depth. He may have been looking at other variations, spent more time on other lines, because after a couple of moves, he also started thinking.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to understand. I mean, it could be that there is in this precise position, or after, say, bishop g7 or knight h6, it could be that there is a very serious alternative of not playing queen b6, because that was the position he has started to think right after queen b6.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then later, 12th bishop e3, an interesting move, offering the poison pawn on b2, and as we figured out, that would be really dangerous to take. The queen's lost. Black does get almost sufficient material for the queen, but yeah, yet Rajabov decided not to take this risk. Queen back to b7.
A very interesting move, and you might wonder, what is the queen doing? Fianchettoing the queen on b7?
Yeah, so once again guarding the c6 pawn to be able to play d7, d6, and eventually develop the light square bishop. Plus, once again, asking white to play c5. That one we've also established. Asking white to play c5, which seemingly is the plan, and after that to take the pawn, to take the knight, to go to d3, and to white's regret, run away to a6. So, of course, now white doesn't want to sack a pawn. White went for queen to b3. And, well, I'm not sure about this moment, because still the feeling is like if white would try to preserve both b pawns by going knight d2, or even postponing it even further, the capture on a7, going rook a3 for now, might have been a chance. And after the trade on a7, trade on b, well, take on a7, take on b3, and especially since the rooks are getting traded, that seems to be too solid to be, you know.
Yeah, and even the other move that you guys asked, if not knight b6 but knight c5, it's just a temporary aggression after bishop c8, d6 will chase the knight away and develop the bishop. So Black didn't have any serious issues after the a7 pawn was traded for the b3 pawn of white. And in the end, maybe it's even Rajabov who could have played on. I see that Neil is informing us that in the final position, Stockfish at the depth of 43 gives a minus 0.46 advantage.
And depth 43 is an illustration of how serious Neil is about chess. You know, the depth 43, I don't have the patience usually to wait for such a depth unless I absolutely have to.
Depth 43 is what you can stand by. That is the evaluation.
So
but I usually stop at depth 10.
Depth 10 is not enough. I know.
I know, I'm just kidding. But the problem is that the engines we may have on some of the chess platforms or mobile phones is not strong enough anyway.
Yeah, well, that perhaps worth mentioning, that if you follow the game online, say, online platform with an online engine, so that's something to pay attention to, because sometimes it would say, well, huge evaluation to one's favor, and then at the end is small letters, you know, depth 15. Depth 15 is 7.5 moves, right? Or half moves, like one move for white, one move for black, blah, blah, blah. That means it's not enough. It means it's not enough. It's not deep enough, and sometimes humans would prove the engine wrong.
Well, we can stand by the depth 43 evaluation of Stockfish, and thank you, Neil, for the support as usual.
So?
I think we will have an interview with the players, with both of them, if I'm correctly informed, so we're going to wait for that before we say goodbye to you for today.
Right, well, I feel delighted to...
They are ready, actually. I've just been informed. I didn't know, so we are going to head to the players.
So we're here with Maxim Ashelograf and Temur Rajabov. The second game of the semi-final also ended in a draw. So Maxim, you were playing with the white pieces. So were you happy with your position after the opening?
Yes, in general I thought I had some chances. This was an idea to get a safe position, but also not without Venom. I was especially happy with this rook e1 move, with the idea of going bishop e3, because I thought for a long time, and I thought in the end that queen a3, d6, c5 was not good enough. And if I go rook d1 with the same ideas, then there are some knight g4 and f5. So So in the end, I was very happy with Rook E1, and it worked, I thought, very, very well. But then I misunderstood in the end game that when I played C5 after E5, if I go Rook A1 D5, I don't think I'm better anymore. And then I had to actually be a bit careful to make a draw. But maybe if I go B4 instead of C5, I rejected it on account of C5, but if then I take bishop takes C4, knight D4, and I finally thought this was maybe dangerous for black, even if I thought knight E5 might still be holding. But anyway, it was an interesting game.
So, and your opinion on this game? So, do you agree with your opponent on these key points?
It's good to be black in the first game because I just can say that I agree with everything he said. So more or less it's easy, you know. Yeah, but I felt that at some point it's getting very awkward with my bishop on b7, and it's like if I don't play e5, I think it's, I don't know, but I mean it doesn't look good. I mean the rook is just coming, rook a1, a7, and it's like unpleasant to play, at least for black, because so the 7th rank is also kind of unprotected and stuff, and rook is coming to a7 and so on. At least practically it's not so pleasant to play this. But after, I mean, I've played this e5, I think probably I'm just okay there. So yeah, but before I was regretting somehow my queen takes b3. I thought maybe I had to play rook b8 and then take with rook on b7, play f5, e5, and stuff like that probably was better. But I mean, it's I mean, we'll just have to see if it's right or not. So just interesting. But in general, I think it wasn't too bad for me, never. But certainly felt at some point that it's kind of unpleasant endgame that I might get into, and you know, my bishops are there. There are two bishops, but still, you know, it's kind of the positioning of my bishops are, I mean, it's very awkward. And once I got this bishop a6 b5, then I was happy about my position in general. That, I mean, it's easier to play maybe as black, but probably it's just equal. So generally, I think it's, I mean, it's normal outcome. Yeah.
And you offered a draw, yes?
No,
I offered.
yeah, but there is no difference, no, I guess. Or in such position, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Now you are going to have white in the second game. So do you think that you have some slight psychological edge after you made a draw with the black pieces?
No, I'm not thinking about it. I mean, it's, you know, these knockout tournaments, many players even deciding to play safe draws fast as white. Let's say there are strategies like this. I mean, I also implemented it in 2004 and stuff. So it's kind of, I mean, trickiest thing. It's only the final result that matters. So certainly, I mean, I cannot say that there is any edge for a player even nowadays playing white. Maybe slight edge, but kind of, you know, not that important in these matches.
And Maxim, are you happy with your black positions in this event so far?
There's been a couple of you know, awkward moments, but in general it hasn't been going badly.
So thank you very much. Please have some rest and enjoy.
Thank you. Thanks.
Indeed, there may have been a mischance by Timur Rajabov in the middle game. He pointed out that queen takes b3 could have been an inaccuracy, and we are going to show you that moment of the game.
Yeah, well, Maxim mentioned himself there have been a couple of awkward moments with the black pieces, but how about that one? And remember, Anna, we were not very keen on taking on b3, so it really turns out that rook b8 and white perhaps after have played queen b3, you have to take. You don't really move the queen away. So rook takes, rook takes.
Yeah, and then takes on b7, rook takes.
Rook takes, d6, e5, f5 being the plan for black. And what's curious about that? So first of all, we were kindly informed by Lorinda that it's well, computer really favors black in this position, well, and understandably. And the other thing, the game that we've mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, in the same line, the game between Magnus Carlsen, or Vachier-Lagrave with white, Magnus Carlsen with black, did feature this maneuver. rook b8 to b7. There wasn't a trade on b7. Magnus just went on b7, having his pawns on 7th rank. So it looked weird. But then at some point, black went e5, f5, and brought the rook from b7 to g7. So it was a very nice game, and once again, recommended to check. And the same maneuver could occur in this game.
It would have been a different game for sure if Rajabov had played rook to b8, and it's a better position for black. Question is if he would have managed to win it, but we will never know. He took on b3 and the game petered out to a draw. Interesting that even though Vacher came to the game with an opening novelty, he had some ideas, he got into a slightly worse position out of the opening in the end. This is move 14, move 14, and black would be better. Usually black doesn't get a better position after move 14.
So I really question his queen b3 decision then, because he could still keep the queens, and it would be still awkward for black to, to establish coordination of his pieces. But what has happened in both games today. It seems that black had little problems equalizing and could. By the way, just a quick check. On the very same move, well, no, here it's one move later. The queen's being traded earlier, but one move later, black could have played knight c4, and this, once again, seems to be in black's favor. That's the other semi-final game So
Indeed.
White having advantage is not clear, because you get to make a mistake first. Playing move 1, right?
We shall see what happens tomorrow, and we will also know now the thoughts of the two Chinese players. We have an interview recorded with the Chinese grandmasters talking about today's game, and we will be back tomorrow for the second game of the classical part of the match. We shall see whether there will be a decisive result or we're going to have another tiebreak. I think there will be at least one tiebreak match, if not two.
That's the feeling. At least one and possibly two tiebreaks, both. Well, there is I'd say reasonably high chance that both semi-finals will be resolved in the shorter time controls.
Indeed, and tomorrow the players may want to take an even more solid approach, especially having in mind that Rajabov will be white, and also Yu Yangyi has the white pieces, so the two more solid players.
More solid and sort of underdogs.
We can barely call them underdogs, but somewhat lower rated than their opponents. The world number 3, Liren, with the black pieces tomorrow, and world number 6, Maxim Vacherov, also with the black pieces. But let's listen to the Chinese players as our final act of the day, and we will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you so much for all your comments and questions on YouTube and Twitch. We definitely hope that you'll be back tomorrow and let us know what your thoughts of the event as well. See you tomorrow.
No? So here we are with Liren and Yu Yangyi from China. So the first game of the semi-final ended in a draw. Liren, you were playing with the white pieces. So were you happy with your position in the opening?
No, I missed 97, 95. I missed this idea, and after this, I was worse, I think. And I'm a little bit worried about castle instead of FE. And after FE bishop g2, maybe I'm more or less fine, since I have this idea rook f4. And at least there is no straightforward win for black. And in the end, maybe it's equal.
And Yangyi, so what can you say from this position in the game? Because as Liren said, that you were better with black.
Yes, and maybe I have some moment, maybe slightly better. I miss castle, bishop g2, knight c4, maybe king c1, knight e3, bishop f3, take. I miss bishop f5. Maybe this chance, I don't know. Maybe slightly better. I think today is played. This game is draw is normal.
Yesterday you had a very tough match with Armageddon. So what was your mood before this game? With Liren, I mean.
Yesterday very dangerous, very difficult match. Because my opponent are very strong. Play very good. I'm very lucky. Today I want to just play chess.
Liren, were you watching the yesterday's tiebreak by Yu Yangyi and Nikita Vityugov?
Yes, actually, after dinner I went back to my room, and it was the Armageddon games. I saw he blundered 2 pawns in a row, blundered 2 pawns with 1 move, and then I thought maybe my opponent will be Vityugov. But then, when I following the live stream on chess pawn, then I saw many red moves made by black. So maybe the and at the first red move, it was already just slightly worse for white. So I realized maybe after more red moves, it's just better or just winning for white. Actually, yeah, you see, it's the story.
Yes, now you're playing with your friend and a teammate, so was it for you a good that Yangyi won, or maybe you would prefer to play with Nikita?
Yes, maybe it's a little bit strange to play against Yu Yangyi, and maybe I had some physical strange feeling to play against my compatriots.
Thank you very much. Thank you, good luck.